You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 215. Hey there. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you? I hope you are ready for a mind stretching episode today, or at least I think it can be quite mind stretching because it's an episode that challenges a lot of beliefs that we've likely held on to for years, probably even decades. And it has to do with our beliefs around productivity and self-worth. And more specifically, how we can start unwinding this connection that so many of our brains make. Now, in our fast-paced world today, so many of us often consider our productivity to be a key measure of success. Many of us find ourselves constantly chasing after achievements and intentionally or unintentionally seeking some kind of validation based on our level of productivity or whether or not we did, quote unquote, enough. In fact, I'm guessing that if you listen to this podcast, you likely know these patterns pretty darn well. I know I do. And I also know from both personal experience and from coaching hundreds of fellow ADHD brains that equating productivity to self-worth can lead to a whole lot of challenges as well, from the constant stress and overwhelm and anxiety to greater emotional dysregulation to complete and total burnout. I mean, in short, it can really impact our health, our mental health, our physical well-being, all of it. And today, what we're going to do is talk about that. We're going to talk about why so many of us have really learned and ingrained the messaging of equating productivity to success and productivity to worthiness. And we're also going to explore a few ways to help us start loosening our grip on this belief just a little bit. Start loosening our belief that our productivity determines our worth or our enoughness, and decide instead with intention what we want to believe. Now, this episode was inspired by a question from one of the members in my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome. I have a private Facebook community just for this cohort, and people can pop on there and ask questions and ask for coaching between our coaching calls each week. And the other day, she posted this really thoughtful question about this topic of productivity and worthiness. And I popped on Facebook and did a live in the group, which is something I do a lot. And the question that she asked was, your podcast episode this week on all or nothing thinking really resonated with me. And as a side note, this was episode 209, in case you're interested in the episode she's referring to. But she said that episode really resonated with me. Can you speak to the belief of equating our worth with our productivity? Even though I know on some level that my worth as a human being is not equal to my productivity, or similarly, that mistakes don't equal complete and total failure, I have a really hard time convincing my brain that this is true. Do you have any suggestions for gently reassuring my brain? Now, I love this question so much because I think it really sums up the wrestle that so many of us have with this very topic. And in the live video that I did, I offered some suggestions to answer her question, as well as some of my own personal approaches that I have used to help me create some greater separation between productivity and worthiness in my own brain. Again, it's been a journey for me. And after I shared that video with the group, I realized that many of you listeners might also resonate with this question. So I wanted to share a portion of what I talked about in the video here today on the podcast. So the first point that I really want to drive home, it is a point that I think is so critical to highlight and underline and asterisk and bold. I really want to stress that worthiness, the idea of worthiness, is a construct. It is just an idea. It is something that somebody made up. Worthiness is not something we can prove. It's not something we can measure. It's not a fact. There's no way you can actually prove what worthiness means. It's just an idea that somebody made up. And in fact, if you polled, 50 different people about what it means to be worthy or what it means to be, quote unquote, enough, you'd probably get at least 60 different answers. because worthiness has different qualifiers for every single person. There is literally no way that we can decide whether someone is worthy or not, or whether or not someone is enough or not. You can't test positive for worthiness. It is genuinely something that you get to define for yourself. Now, this might feel a little bit destabilizing since our black and white brains like to have really concrete rules. And I also think it can be an important reminder for us to ground ourselves. So it might feel a little destabilizing, but I think it can also be incredibly grounding. In fact, I think it can be super refreshing to remember that you can't hustle enough to reach an official place that is quote unquote worthy. It's just not possible. It doesn't equate. And if you're multitasking, if maybe you've blocked out the opening part of the podcast, sometimes that happens in my brain, come back to me, okay? This is really important. You literally can't do enough, check enough boxes, get enough A pluses to reach an official level of quote unquote worthiness or enoughness. There is no official definition. Instead, you get to decide what worthiness or quote unquote being enough means to you. So with that in mind, you could create your own definition and use that as a checkpoint. Or, and this is the belief that I personally practice, you can also decide that all humans inherently are worthy. And simply because they exist on the planet and you exist on the planet, your worthiness is complete right now. You literally can't do anything else more to make you more worthy. And you literally can't do anything to make you less worthy. It simply exists because you're a human on this planet, full stop. Now, admittedly, some of your brains might be pushing back against this right now, and that is absolutely okay. My brain pushed against this concept very strongly for a very long time. And you know what? It still likes to question it every now and again, especially when it comes to the topic of productivity and worthiness. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode with that question, it's a really prominent correlation for so many of us. So wherever you are in regard to this perspective of worthiness and productivity and enoughness, I promise you are in the right place. Because today we're going to explore 3 key reasons why so many of us really grapple with this idea of worthiness and enoughness and productivity specifically. I find that this is one of those topics where bringing awareness to the origins of these beliefs and why they're just so ingrained in our society, bringing that awareness can be incredibly powerful in helping us intentionally release the beliefs we don't want to keep. And then after that, we're going to explore a few ways that you can explore to help you start wiggling those beliefs loose and start separating that thought of worthiness from productivity. So first, why do so many of us have this connection ingrained into our being? Why do we tell ourselves things like, ugh, I'm worthless today. I didn't get enough done. Or my colleague so-and-so is so much better than me. They had more sales this quarter. Or today was a total wash. I didn't get anything checked off my list. What a waste. Meanwhile, we completely ignore the connections we made with people, the emotions we experienced, the fun we had, the things we did do. We ignore all of it. Why is this? What is happening right now? Of course, there are so many reasons why. In fact, there are books written about this topic specifically. So I'm really only going to scratch the surface here today in one podcast episode. But I do want to put these strong beliefs that we have into context. They may not all speak to your unique situation, but as I share the different examples, I do encourage you to notice the ones that stand out the most to you. So the first category is our work culture and this constant demand for productivity. So in today's society, there is a very strong emphasis on productivity and efficiency. And I think this is especially true in the workplace, where in many environments, employees are very much expected to work long hours and meet demanding deadlines. And as we've seen in several industries recently, we see this demand to meet all of these deadlines with fewer employees doing the work. And when we have more work with fewer people, it almost always requires more hours for those select few. And more generally, this demand on productivity and efficiency can also lead to this culture of busyness, where employees really feel like they need to be constantly working in order to be successful because that's how everything's measured, which, not surprisingly, leads to a whole bunch of unnecessary stress and anxiety and burnout. And it can come from those clear demands, higher up the chain of command, starting with the C-suite, trickling down to the bosses and the managers, and then to the team members. But it can also look like situations in academia, for example, where there aren't necessarily specific quotas to meet unless you're maybe going up for tenure or something. But instead, it's just this vague demand for more output. You can always be working on the next article, working on the next book, getting out the next abstract for the conference, whatever. You should always be doing more. Now, of course, we see this also in the entrepreneurial space and for freelancers who are driven by this kind of hustle culture, right? They tout this message that you can sleep when you're dead. Again, there's always more a person can do, especially when you own your own business and you're wearing most of the hats yourself. I promise you there's more you can do. And for contractors who are paid by the hours they work, time literally means money. It's the same for all of us who are working hours for dollars. So the work culture generally emphasizes this prioritization of work. And of course, work and productivity are great. Okay, so let me step back here. Work and productivity are great. I am not saying that work is bad or productivity is bad. These are both great things, but not when it comes at the expense of your well-being. Not when it comes at the expense of your other priorities in life. It is not great when it's taking away from you living your life. But also, when everyone else around you is on that hamster wheel of more, it can be really challenging to challenge that status quo. It gets harder and harder to consider, surely there's got to be another way here. Surely we don't need to constantly do more. There must be a point at which we reach enough, right? When everyone else around us is on that hamster wheel, it can be very hard to consider these alternative perspectives. It can be very challenging to do that. In fact, I was just working with one of my clients last week on this very topic. She is a total rock star and decided to lean into setting really clear work boundaries for herself. She decided she was going to sign off her work messenger at the end of work on Friday. She had finished her work. She was going to sign off. She did sign off and didn't sign back on until the beginning of the work week. And what's really powerful here is she knew other people on her team were choosing to work that weekend, but she did not. She finished her work on Friday. She chose to stop working and focus on the other areas of her life. And I have a feeling many of you can appreciate how hard this might be knowing that your teammates are working. Now, in doing this, what I think is really special is she inspired a conversation with her other colleagues the following week who were working that weekend. And they talked about how their team might start working ahead a little bit further with a longer lead time so that these weekend sprints become a thing of the past, because now they'd have enough time during the week to complete the work. But again, being the person to challenge that status quo and say, nah, I'm not going to work on the weekend, even if it is the culture of the team, that can be really scary. And let me be clear that I also understand there are times when you don't want to challenge that because of potential repercussion. That is very real too, right? And that's actually not what this episode's about anyway. What I do want to drive home here is that many people listening to this podcast right now, whether you are in corporate or not, you are likely well steeped in this corporate messaging that loops this demand for greater productivity and efficiency, which then leads to more time, which then gets filled with more work. And it loops, right? Rather than getting more efficient and getting more done and opening up more time for downtime and breathing room, we instead fill that free time that we created because we were more efficient with more work, which then leads to burnout. Okay, so this is category number one that fuels so many of our beliefs around productivity and worth. It's demanded so much in corporate culture, in businesses, in the entrepreneurial space, in any type of work culture. And The more we get done, the more it's rewarded and recognized and encouraged, which then further reinforces that demand for productivity and success. Now, the second overarching category that really contributes to the demand for greater productivity and this link between productivity and worth comes from the greater social and cultural pressures around us each day. There's often this emphasis on achievement and success, and then we don't really talk about how there's the struggle and the journey along the way. It just kind of is this focus on reaching the achievement without talking about the failures on the way to success. And because of this, we're constantly comparing our chapter 1 not only to everyone else's chapter 20, but to everyone else's New York Times bestseller, right? We're starting chapter 1. We're like, why don't I have a New York Times bestseller yet? We're thinking we should be farther along because we're just doing this constant compare and despair, forgetting that there is this messy middle for everybody. And I think it's so important for us to pause and remember that even if people don't share that messy middle, and they don't have to, right? They get to decide what they share and what they don't. But even if people aren't sharing it, there always is that messy middle for everybody as we work toward our big goals. That is simply part of the process, even if we can't see it. And it's really important that we remind ourselves of that. Similarly, we may notice that everyone around us might be talking about how busy they are. And because of this, we start equating busyness with importance and success and achievement, right? Oh, they must be really busy. That must mean they're really important. So I need to be really busy so that I appear really important. And many of our brains start thinking that, in order to be successful, we also have to be busy all the time. And what's more, our brains also start linking the idea that if we're not busy, if we're not staying busy all the time, then that means we must be lazy. And we don't want that. Nobody ever wants to be considered lazy. And that brings me to another point, actually, of this kind of overarching social messaging around productivity and worthiness, especially within the United States. And this roots itself in Christianity. Now, despite the fact that there is technically this separation of church and state, those of us in the United States are likely well aware of the religious undertones that kind of permeate the culture. And throughout Christianity, there are many references to the importance of staying active and avoiding idleness. Stay busy, don't be lazy. Just think of that familiar phrase, idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? I mean, again, whether or not you were raised in a Christian faith, I think it'd be challenging to escape this message entirely if you live within the United States. Of course, this is a much more nuanced conversation, and I certainly don't have the qualifications or experience to speak for anyone but myself, but I can certainly trace that messaging myself, and I think that messaging runs very deep. And then the other key element when it comes to the social pressure to do more and achieve more and stay busy and stay productive in today's society is generally social media. We are essentially taking this messaging that, again, permeates work culture and our society's focus on achievement and success generally, and then we're putting it in this giant magnifying glass with social media. And we're seeing everyone's successes magnified and celebrated with this perfectly curated highlight reel. So now, not only do we see our colleagues and our relatives and our neighbors and our immediate friend group as this basis for comparison, but now our brain has essentially the entirety of the world at the touch of a button sharing their curated highlight reels as well. And that is a lot for our overstimulated, all or nothing brains to contend with. And it is very easy to slip into believing that you're not doing enough, you should be doing more, and you're falling behind. Exo, your brain, right? This is the story it tells us. Okay, so that's category number 2. Now we have category number 3, which I am including our own personal pressure that we put on ourselves, as well as our past experiences and our earlier upbringing. Now, before we dive into this, I want to make sure I stay in my lane here as your coach. Okay, I'm not a therapist, so I'm not going to talk a whole lot about earlier childhood experiences, except to say that what you were taught to value or what you saw modeled as being valuable or important when you were growing up likely shaped what you value or don't value today. And this makes sense, right? The brain was especially spongy when we were young, and it quickly learned to absorb all of this messaging. And these values we learned early on became these well-worn neural pathways. So if you saw hard work and achievement modeled for you, and you had clear expectations that you needed to meet these high bars as well, that's how you received attention, it's a good chance that you hold those similar expectations for yourself as well. Now, I am again going to remind us to practice our cognitive flexibility here, right? Remember to see the gray in between the black and white. And remember that just because we were modeled that hard work is a good thing, that doesn't mean it's bad. Okay. I love that I was raised with the value of hard work. I love that. This isn't necessarily a problem, but sometimes we might forget about the other values that we have that help us create that life we want, because instead we slip into our black and white thinking and we focus only on one or two values of producing and achieving because it's been reinforced in culture and society and all the things around us, and we tend to forget about the other things that matter to us. And suddenly, life kind of starts to feel a whole lot less fun because all we focus on is producing. I know for myself, I would find myself thinking, I kind of feel like I'm missing the point of life right now. I keep working and doing and checking things off the list, but so what? Who cares? I feel like I'm missing some puzzle pieces or something. And I was, because I allowed the values of hard work and productivity to completely eclipse everything else. And I was missing out on the other things that I genuinely valued, like fun and play and relationships and connection. So check in and notice those stories you're telling yourself about always needing to do better or be better. What if that's not true? Because spoiler alert, it's not. I promise you it's not true. You do not need to do more or be better to be quote unquote worthy. Again, as a reminder to the first point that I made in this episode, worthiness is a construct. It is an idea that somebody made up. And we get to define what that means for ourselves. No amount of doing or achieving will check that box to make you worthy. It's just not possible. There's no level of perfection that will check the box of worthiness. There is no level of material wealth that will check that box. There is no financial benchmark or position in a company or material possession you can buy that will check that box. None of those things actually matter. Now, I'm not saying that you can't work toward those things if you want to. If you want to work toward those things, if you want to work toward the job promotion or whatever, if that is a full body yes for you, heck yes, I am in. I am right on board with you. Do it if you want to, if it's a full body yes, if it's a genuine want. But do it because it's fun. Do it because it challenges you and it allows you to learn a new skill and try something new that lights you up. But please also remember that reaching that goal or achieving that promotion or checking the things off your list or 10xing your productivity, that will never touch your worthiness ever. It literally can't. So if you're taking on these extra things just to feel like you've quote unquote done enough, I invite you to pause and question that as well. Okay. So you might be thinking, okay, what then am I supposed to do? Now what? Maybe you're hearing me say these things and you're like, okay, yeah, I can see how this is really drilled into me. And I hear that it's an idea. I get it intellectually, but how the heck do I get my brain on board with this? How can I possibly start separating this connection between productivity and achievement and worthiness? Because I'm pretty sure right now my brain thinks that they are the same thing. And as I mentioned, this is definitely a journey. It is one that I am still on myself at times, and that's okay. Honestly, sometimes I think this is the lesson I was put on this very earth to learn in every way imaginable. And you may feel a similar way. Or maybe you have another lesson that just keeps circling back repeatedly in different situations. please know that if you do have that lesson that loves to keep showing up in different situations, it's okay. Nothing's gone wrong here. This work of self-coaching, I think of it kind of like weightlifting. You can't really just go to the gym and lift weights once and become strong. In fact, you need to lift those weights several times over multiple days to start building strength. And you need to stick with lifting those weights to maintain the strength. But also, it does get easier each time you do it. And the same is true with some of these well-worn neural pathways, these well-worn thoughts that we've been practicing over and over. We may need to practice our new beliefs like we're lifting weights. We may need to do several reps of these new beliefs to help us really start separating that story of worthiness from productivity. And that's okay. That's what we're here to do. And the more we practice it, the easier it gets to genuinely believe it and know it to be true for you. And if we take a few weeks off from the gym, from practicing those thoughts, we step away from those practices for a little bit, we may notice some of those older thoughts sneak back in. Again, not a problem. We know what to do. We know which weights to lift to build up that strength again. Now, I think the work of separating productivity from self-worth, as I've mentioned throughout the podcast, is quite layered. In fact, I think a person could probably create an entire podcast, not just one episode, but like a whole podcast dedicated to this topic. But today, I invite you to explore 3 things to help you get started on this journey of learning how to question and then separate this connection between worth or enoughness from how much you do each day. And as a side note, if you find that this episode is really resonating with you and you want to dive in and take it further in your life, I would love to help you do so. We can approach it in a couple of ways. We can work together in We're Busy Being Awesome, again, my small group coaching program for ADHD brains. I also take on a limited number of private clients if you want to deep dive into the topic one-on-one. And you can learn more about both options. You can add your name to the wait lists for both through the links in the show notes. But again, if you want to take this work further, this is my jam and I would love to support you in it. But for now, I invite you to really dip your toe into the water by considering these 3 things as you start separating worthiness from productivity. So first, who are you outside of your work? I invite you to pause and really examine and answer this question. If you were asked to introduce yourself without talking about anything having to do with your work, what would you share? Challenge your brain here to identify and really appreciate these other key parts of you as equally valuable to the worker bee parts. What are the other parts that you would share if you weren't allowed to talk about your work or your productivity? The second step is to start experimenting with redefining success and doing this by deciding intentionally what success means to you. Again, I think it's safe to assume that most people listening to this podcast probably want to feel successful or accomplished or fulfilled at the end of the day. I think most people want to feel that sense of accomplishment. And right now, many of us look to our to-do lists for information of whether or not we can feel successful. We let our to-do list tell us that. But using our to-do list as a unit of measurement, that's totally optional. Did you know this? We don't have to use how much we get done to measure our success. You could also define a successful day on literally anything else you want to. You could decide that it's been a successful day simply because the sun came up and you declared a success. Done. You could base a successful day on whether you met someone new when you were out and about, or how many times you laughed, or whether or not you went in the sunshine, or if you made time to connect with someone you love, or if you slept, or if you read a few pages from the library book you got, or if you made intentional time for fun. You literally get to decide what success means to you. So why not try choosing something other than checking things off your to-do list? What might that look like? And this brings us to step 3. And in step 3, I invite you to practice using your new measure of success every day this week. So you can use the same new measurement that you chose. Maybe it's a successful day if you laugh out loud more than once. Or you could switch it up each day where, maybe Monday you measure your laughter and Tuesday you measure whether it's successful if you made time for fun, right? The main guideline here is to measure your success by something other than your productivity each week and allow yourself to feel that sense of accomplishment. Show your brain there's another way to think about this, and then see what happens. Notice if there are shifts. Notice how it feels to experience that sense of accomplishment in a new way. Or notice if there's a whole lot of resistance from your brain. Notice if it's difficult to step into a new way of seeing success. Either way is great data to work with. And again, if you find that you want to take this work further and learn how to make that separation between productivity and worth for your brain, if you really want to learn how to make that separation for you, I would love to dive in and help you do that. You can check out the show notes for links to both We're Busy Being Awesome and private coaching. Through the show notes, you'll have links for both. And in the meantime, pop over to Instagram and let me know how you're measuring success today. I am at I'm Busy Being Awesome, and I can't wait to connect with you. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you're enjoying this podcast or you're finding it helpful in working with your ADHD brain, would you be a rock star and leave a review? You can head to the link in the show notes, and there are step-by-step instructions right there to guide you through it. It'll only take a minute, and doing so helps me get these strategies to even more people, and I really appreciate it. Also, have you grabbed the podcast roadmap yet? It has the most popular episodes all detailed for you, so you can get yourself up to speed and ready to work with your ADHD brain. You can grab it now through the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/map. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.